So now that we've seen some of the weirdness that can happen with character input, let's take a look at some of the weirdness that can happen with string input. So this is the strings example here in the chapter 2 char and string demo. Um, a couple of things here in the code to be aware of. First, you'll notice that we have our first additional include statement. That's going to be the string, because without the string standard library, we're not going to be able to do, well, complex things with a string, but quite frankly, we're not going to be able to use them in a meaningful way anyway. The reason string is its own library is because for you and me, it feels like, yeah, text input as a string would be. So things like, in this example, a name or a first name or a last name should be, baked into the pudding, as it were. And in modern languages, it is. But where C++ derives from C, and where C was one of the original languages, they were working with they were working with the cardinal data types, the integers, the floating point numbers, the doubles and characters. They weren't worried so much about strings, and that had to be baked in later. So the same is here with the string library. It's a whole chunk of stuff we have to bring in so that we can work with strings, even in the rudimentary way that we're going to see it here in this example. So I have two strings that I'm declaring here, first name and last name, and I'm going to ask the user to enter their first name first, their last name second, then I'm going to do an output. So we're going to go ahead and run this, and I'm going to put in my first name. There's my second name, and when I hit enter, everything worked as we expected. I get welcome, and there's my first name in the output. There's the space I have to include inside of my double quotes there, and my last name with a period that I'm including there. You can see that right here. However, if I was to include a name that had a space in it, so my name doesn't, but for example, let's run this again. And if I am a Jean-Luc, if I could spell it correctly, so if I am a Jean-Luc and hit enter, you're going to notice it's going to skip over my last name because it's already experiencing what the cin can deal with, and that is this space character right there. Like I've mentioned before, and like undoubtedly I'm going to have to remind many of you later on, is when you are working with a string, it is best not to use the cin statement. So on line 12 and on line 16, I'm just going to comment those out. Remember again that that is control or command / depending upon what kind of system you're on. And I'm going to comment in lines 13 and line 17. Get line, and then inside of the parens here, cin, comma, and then the name of my variable. So this is actually a function that's included in this string library. Don't worry about what that all means. We're going to create our own functions later. Now, before I do anything, which I'm going to do in the background here, you'll notice that there's those little red squiggly lines at the end of line 13 and 17. And look at the error that we get in the console. Expected semicolon after expression. That's pretty good, C++. That's pretty good. So we're going to run this again. And just like in our previous example, Jean-Luc is our first name. And you'll notice it doesn't skip over our last name. The getLine function, so getLine, the parens, inside the parens, cin, comma, and then over here, whatever the name of your variable is. That's going to deal with a string. A string can have spaces. It can have special characters. What it can't have is a new line, so the enter character, because that's going to suggest to the output window here, to the console rather, that the the input is done so that we go to whatever the next line of code is after wherever we're waiting for that input. So we'll just complete that. There's Wolf and Jean-Luc Wolf. So that works. Remember, when you are working with string input, names, cities, all of that kind of stuff, use getLine instead of cin. It's going to lead to less frustration.